What is up, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another video. So today we're going to be talking about Skirk's changes. I know I haven't been as, should we say, consistent with her beta changes from week 1 to week 2 to week 3 and to week 4. However, I have compiled all the information that is needed to show off and discuss what has changed with regards to Skirk's kit. So within the second to third week, the changes that have been changed for Skirk's kit. One, we're going to start off with the weapon. Now, a lot of people would argue that Escofia's weapon was needed for Skirk. However, there are cases where you can use other 5-star alternatives. I myself am going to be using the Staff of Homer on Escofia because, you know, it's a really, really good weapon. It's universal. It's very strong. But with Skirk's weapon, the base attack was initially 608 and she had a crit rate of 33.1%, which was quite nice. However, her weapon's actually been buffed. Now, in a way to explain how it's been buffed, her weapon has been changed from 608 to 674 attack and has reduced the crit rate by from 33.1 to 22 percent crit rate. Now, one thing that has changed about Skirk, which is quite nice, is the particle generation was initially 4 particles from her skill. Now that has been changed to where she generates 4 particles when dealing cryo damage to enemies, and so that means her enhanced normal attacks and damage from her ultimate will also generate particles, which is really nice. I'm not gonna lie, they've actually cooked with some of these changes. Now, her multipliers have been buffed as well for her skill, final skill damage, as well as her serpent stacks. Now, you might think it's a bit of a nerf, but on paper calculations, it is actually a buff. So the skill damage is used to be 248.6%, and that was a 5 that hit 5 times. It's now a 220.968%, so that has changed by like at least 28%. The final attack has changed from a whopping 414.36% to 368.28%. Now, that might seem like a crazy nerf, but the change that actually makes it a buff is that her serpent stacks have been buffed from 29.92% to being buffed to 34.782%. So this is kind of like the the fiery passion that we have for Varisa, if you know what I mean. The fiery passion that we had, where fiery passion, it would buff her her plunging, and it would also buff her special burst. This is kind of like the same thing with Skirk. Now, one thing that's quite nice, again, for those who are C0, you'll see 0, but for those who have been waiting for Skirk since the official reveal of her being in the story, her C2 has been buffed. And so the way it's been buffed is initially you had 12 stacks of extra stacks of serpent stacks. Now they've lowered the stacks by 2, so instead of 12 it's 10, but they also made it where she gained a 60% normal attack damage buff. They've changed that now to where it's a 10 stack buff to her stacks, and she has buffed her. She gets buffed attack after using her special burst by 60% once, and that obviously ends when she exits the enhanced state. So that has changed for those who are going to wail or choose to wail for Skirk. So, I mean, that's kind of nice, but it's also kind of a bum because some of the changes, in my opinion, that I know Hoyoverse do a lot is they basically make it where the character feels more fun, feels stronger, and feels a bit more playable in a certain way to do more damage when it comes to spending more money. Realistically, when you get a functioning character, you get a functioning character to a base level or a decent level, but when you want them to perform to their, a really good level, not insanely OP, but like a really decently good level where it feels comfortable, you kind of have to get Constellation sometimes. But one thing that's quite nice is Skirk's cooldown on her skill has been buffed, so it's reduced by 1 second. This ultimately means damage numbers, damage rotations are just going to be faster, depending on, you know, playing the game. It's quite nice if you care about damage numbers like that, but if you're not really bothered about it, it is what it is. Hey, you can skill a bit quicker. One thing that is also one of the pinnacles of Skirk's kit that was a little bit concerning is for those who play the Spiral Abyss and for those who may not play the Spiral Abyss, when characters were on the field and had little to no energy, obviously we know that energy recharge is an important, you know, thing in the game when you sometimes want to funnel energy to the next character so they have their burst or their abilities ready to cast on field as soon as you start your rotation. However, with Skirk, her stacks were a bit of a problem. Now, we didn't know whether or not her stacks would be consistent, how they would change within the Abyss. One thing that's quite like a legit QOL for her is the fact that when the Abyss starts, you actually start with maximum stacks. So as I was saying in my last video, that was probably like 2 weeks ago, you get a maximum of 100 stacks, right? I said, oh, you cannot achieve that at C0. Well, actually in the Spiral Abyss, you start with max stacks, which is 100, which is really nice. Now, this also means when you go ahead and you enter a new rotation, if you end, say, with 40 stacks, for example, the next chamber that you enter with Skirk, you're not going to start at 100, you're going to start with 40. So that is kind of a nice change, a nice thing to have. So every single floor that you go into, every single chamber, whatever, if you maximize your stacks, so we say you finish your rotation and you actually get to about 60 stacks, to say, for example, you did it so quickly that you just got yourself a decent amount of stacks back. Woo! You got yourself 60 for the next floor! What can I say? I mean, not for the next floor, but next chamber. You get what I mean. The next floor, you'd get maximum 100 again. But it's nice. It's nice. It's a nice QOL. Now, one thing that is quite cool is because of this passive that I'm going to talk about now, it has changed Skirk's playstyle a little bit, but it's also enabled her to do different things. As we already know, she's a hyper carry for Freeze teams, obviously, because she's locked behind Cryo and Hydro. There is a massive, and I mean a massive change with her passive that she had called the Death Crossing. This meant that you had an increase in normal attack and burst damage based on the fact that you, obviously did Hydro and Cryo hits. Now, this initial passive was anyone in the team, if they went ahead and hit an opponent with Hydro or Cryo damage, that would trigger the passive, okay? They have changed that, so when teammates hit opponents, not when dealing damage. Does that make sense? So instead of having to rely on certain characters to physically deal damage and then being immune, you wouldn't be able to gain stacks. You wouldn't be able to gain any... You wouldn't help Skirk in any way, is what I'm trying to say. So shielded enemies, immune enemies, she had a struggle, I mean a legit struggle getting through and actually being able to benefit from it. So if you had Tulpa, oh, Furina, it's Hydro, I can't do anything. I can't apply anything. Oh, well now that's changed, which is big, by the way. So any immune enemies, the Tulpa, I just gave you an example, any Wyobs, any shielded enemies, oh my god, Skirk, you are going to receive such a benefit with that passive. Wonderful. And I'm not gonna lie, the only reason why that changed is simply because of the CN community. Hoyoverse was not gonna change that, and CN said, nah, we need to change this shit. But looking at all these changes, we're getting very close to the final kit of Skirk. Guys, I really hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know what you think down in the comment section down below. However, I gotta say one final thing. Based on these changes, it does mean that farming her new set isn't necessarily the most important thing you need to do. I would just put a hold on to it for now. But Marishosei, if you have her paired with Furina, is looking very competitive, especially with all these changes. It is looking very competitive to her new set. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please do consider dropping a like, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and I will see you guys in the next one. It's been your boy. Peace out.